I'm Rick Goldsmith. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I'm based out in Oakland, California. I've been reading the newspapers since I was 7 years old. I used to go out in my PJs and bare feet and get the New York Herald Tribune off my doorstep and come inside and read the sports scores of the Yankee games. That drew me into the world of newspapers. I got connected to the community outside, I feel like, through the newspapers. I began to understand that I was part of a larger community, and there was a larger community out there that was important. It was important to my family, was important to me. While my initial connection to it was through sports, that's what was so great about newspapers. You finished with what you really came to do was read about the sports, and then you're flipping through the pages and you're reading about the world outside, the city government, what's happening in the presidents, and even as a young kid, I felt like I had a hunger to know about that world. So I was reading newspapers since I was a kid, and every morning since, I have my breakfast, I have a newspaper in front of me. Flash forward many years, and the newspapers started obviously becoming thinner and thinner. And I knew some of the reasons why the newspapers were in trouble financially in general all over the country. I, attributed to, different reading habits of the younger generation, the internet and Craigslist taking away the classified advertising from newspapers. So I kind of had the kind of understanding that the average person had. And then in the spring of 2018, I came across this article that was headlined something like, Alden Global Capital is making so much money wrecking local journalism, it may not stop anytime soon. As I read the article, new things came to me. Here is some outfit that was wrecking local journalism. Why? Like, why would anybody try intentionally direct local journalism? How could anybody make money out of what I kind of knew was somewhat of a failing industry? And then the thing that really tipped the balance for me was, here were some people fighting back against, there was a rebellion of sorts from journalists in Denver, Colorado. What was that all about? Because I knew from all my work in journalism, one of the sacred cows of the press is the press itself. Journalists don't write about their own profession, they don't write about their own industry. And here, they were not only writing about it, they were not only covering the story, but they were the story. We are in a unique time in the arc of journalism, newspapers and journalism in this country. And by that I mean newspapers were a great vehicle to deliver journalism to the people in this country for 150, 200 years. They had a great business model. It was based on advertising, which made their journalism have some shortcomings in itself. They provided this hefty vehicle to deliver journalism from all parts of the community. Because newspapers were so lucrative, they could afford to carry big newsroom staffs to cover every part of the community, not only news, but sports and arts and education and columnists and comics and Dear Abby and the obits. Beginning in probably the first decade of this century, and certainly now, that business model started to fail, and now it is failing. So newsrooms were cut back and cut back and cut back to the point that they don't have a business model really that works for local journalism. There are going to be newspapers that thrive, but they're few and far between. When I got into the film that Stripped for Parts in 2018, what I saw were kind of two divergent things. One, on the one hand, newspapers were failing in that way, and there was a crisis in local journalism. So the cities and towns weren't getting the coverage they needed. There were news deserts, meaning whole counties that had no local newspapers and ghost newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle was becoming in my town, shadows of their former selves. So that was one trend. A second trend was many, many people out there, dozens of people in communities all across the country, recognizing that there needed to be something new. And so there were typically digital startups. A lot of them were nonprofits. Some of them were for-profits. They often had small staffs, maybe 1, 2, or 3 staff members, reporters out in the community, some 10 or 20. Nothing that rivaled the hefty newspapers of the past, the legacy newspapers, most of them doing real public service journalism, maybe even more so than the legacy newspapers, because the legacy newspapers were catering to, if not the advertisers, the upper middle class, the business class, the powerful. And these were people who were supposed to be holding the powerful to account. Whereas these new startups, they connected more with the community. They tended to cover communities that hadn't been covered before: the poor, the homeless, people of color, people that didn't have a voice before, organized labor. These are all parts of our world that needed to be covered. That was a good development. That was a bright development. That was an optimistic development. So in the 6 years since I started working on that film, that kind of dichotomy only increased, with newspapers being shut down or being bought up by hedge funds, or becoming shadows of their former selves. And on the other hand, more and more of these new startups, with their journalists gaining more stature, getting more experience, becoming more hefty themselves, and maybe viable for the future. I will say that the crisis that we're in is by no means over, and maybe we're even in the trough. In other words, the downhill has reached somewhat close to the bottom, and maybe that uphill and that improvement is coming. But if it is coming, it has a long way to go. The new journalists that we're seeing and the new news organizations, they're not just trying to save journalism. They're trying to reinvent it, reinvigorate it, and rebuild it. To anybody that thinks that we've lost the battle, it's just not true. But we are at a tipping point. We're at a crossroads. There's no doubt about that. Without strong local journalism that people believe in and that people actually actively go to inform themselves, democracy's not going to work. And I think we're already seeing that there's a breakdown in how people interact with each other in their community on the great social issues of the day. And the great social issue might be in some town or some city, what's happening at City Hall. Or it might be there's a new plant that's, some people are saying, are polluting the rivers or polluting the water or in some way bringing harm to the community. If people aren't informing themselves on what might be the solutions to those problems, holding the powerful accountable, those sorts of things, then we can't really make democracy work. We can't come up with legislation, inform the public to vote on that legislation, or push their elected representatives to do the kind of work that's going to correct our social and political problems. What's filling the gap of strong local journalism is, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation, a lot of disinformation, perpetuated by social media, by things that go viral that nobody really knows, is this true or is not true, but it sounds really cool, and It's, there's a conspiracy to do this and there's a conspiracy to do that. That's not the way we can make progress in this country, whether it's on a very, very hyper-local level or on a national level. So we really need to turn the ship around. I think we're at a place akin to where climate change was maybe 30, 40 years ago, where a few people knew how serious the problem was, but the general public wasn't really informed and kind of didn't really care. Progressively over several decades, people got more serious about climate change and what we needed to do about it. That's still a big problem. We're far from at a good point there, but at least it's on people's radar. The crisis in local journalism is beginning to get on people's radar, but we have a long way to go.